Okay, I must interrupt my series of historical videos pronounced in French to return to English for a while. According to National Review, one of the American magazines or newspapers whose digital newsletter I have subscribed to, just announced via Gmail that a two-time independent or third-party US presidential candidate, computer billionaire Henry Ross Perot, has died at 89. He created quite a stir during the 1992 presidential campaign when at first he declared, I think in February, either January or February 1992, when being interviewed by Larry King on CNN, that he did not want to be president. But then he issued a challenge. If ordinary American citizens wanted him to run, they would have to organize themselves in state after state to put him on the ballot. And then he, in one poll, even led both the Republican candidate, the presidential candidate, although he would officially be nominated only in August 1992, George Bush, the elder George Bush, by the way, and then the prospective Democratic presidential candidate, Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas. But then his poll numbers sank, and on the same evening, July the 16th, 1992, when the Democratic National Convention officially nominated Bill Clinton to oppose George Bush in the upcoming November 1992 US presidential election, Mr. Perot announced that he would withdraw from the presidential election for three reasons. First, he no longer felt he had a chance of winning. Second, he claimed that the Democratic Party had revitalized itself. And thirdly, he did not want to force the US House of Representatives to elect the president in case none of the presidential candidates would get a majority in the Electoral College in the popular vote stage of the US presidential elections. Perot was definitely a factor in the 1992 presidential elections because he was the most popular third party or independent presidential candidate in 80 years, receiving about 19% of the vote. And according to the Time magazine or the Newsweek magazine, receiving, I think, over 20% of the vote in 30 states out of 50. He came close to winning one of Maine's electoral districts or congressional districts, but in the end did not win it. In Maine, his percentage of the vote was highest at 30%. And while he failed to win a single state or a single electoral vote, according to some people, like then US Senator Robert Dole, who would unsuccessfully challenge Bill Clinton for the presidency in the 1996 elections, Perot's candidacy contributed to the defeat of George Bush and helped to elect Bill Clinton, with whom he had allegedly little in common. Perot ran on a populist platform claiming that balancing the US federal budget would be simple. The Congress would pass a constitutional amendment outlawing the budget deficits, and then there would be automatic cuts to spending. Critics of that amendment claimed that it could not be enforced in the US federal courts. He also promised not to seek a second term. In other words, he would do what it took to fix the US economy and especially the budget deficit, which already back then was a major problem because it was around $300 billion at that time. By contrast, nowadays, the deficit is about 1 trillion US dollars every year, regardless of how quickly or slowly the economy is growing. And neither one of the two main parties in the United States, neither the ruling Republicans nor the main opposition party, the Democrats, have a single credible plan for even radically and sustainably reducing the deficit, let alone balancing the budget. And I just wonder if in the 2020 US federal elections, there will be third parties which will get a substantial number of protest votes from those American voters who are disgusted with having to always vote for the lesser of two evils, or too often do that. There may be a number of surprises coming up in the 2020 US federal and even state and local elections, because so many Americans feel alienated from both of the two main political parties. Okay, to get back to Mr. Perot, he was born on June the 27th, 1930 in Texarkana in Texas, and he died today on July the 9th, 2019, aged 89 in Dallas, Texas. He was educated at Texarkana College and at the United States Naval Academy. As of October 2017, his net worth was 4.1 billion US dollars. He was an independent before 1995. He belonged to the Reform Party from 1995 to 2000, but then he joined the Republican Party. He was married to Margaret Birmingham and had 5 children. He was also a philanthropist. He was the founder and former chief executive officer of Electronic Data Systems and Perot Systems. Born in Texarkana, Texas, Perot became a salesman for IBM after serving in the United States Navy. In 1962, he founded Electronic Data Systems, a data processing service company. In 1984, General Motors bought the controlling interest in the company for $2.4 billion. Perot established Perot Systems in 1988 and was an angel investor for Next, a computer company founded by the late Steve Jobs after he left Apple. Perot also became heavily involved in the Vietnam War, prisoners of war, and missing in action issue, arguing that hundreds of American servicemen had been left behind in Southeast Asia after the Vietnam War. During the tenure of George H.W. Bush from 1989 to 1993, Perot became increasingly active in politics and strongly opposed the First Persian Gulf War in 1991 and the ratification of the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1993. Perot promised during his 1992 presidential campaign, or advocated anyway, a balanced budget, an end to the outsourcing of jobs, and the enactment of electronic direct democracy. In his second and last presidential campaign, he was much less prominent and much less successful, winning only about 8% of the popular vote. In that election, his candidacy was not considered a major factor, even though technically, had he and the Republican presidential candidate, former Senator Robert Dole, presented a united front and had every single vote which was given to Perot being given to Dole, in addition to the 40.7% which he won, then Dole would have virtually tied Bill Clinton. But probably also in that election, as in the 1992 US presidential election, a substantial minority of the Perot voters would not have voted at all in the presidential election had he not been on the ballot. According to William A. de Gregorio's book, a complete book of the United States presidents, according to an exit poll, 30% of the Perot voters in November 1992 would not have voted at all had he not been on the ballot. After 1996, Perot neither sought public office nor entered the 2000 Reform Party presidential primaries. He endorsed the eventual winner of the 2000 US presidential election, George W. Bush, in 2000, and supported Republican Mitt Romney in 2008 and 2012. In 2009, Dell acquired Perot Systems for $3.9 billion US dollars. According to the Forbes magazine, Perot was the 167th richest person in the United States in 2016. Perot was born in Texarkana, Texas, a city bordering Arkansas, the son of Lula Mae Perot, nee Ray, and Gabriel Ross Perot, a commodity broker specializing in cotton contracts. His patrilineal line, meaning the ancestors of his father, traces back to an immigrant to French Louisiana in the 1740s. While in teens, Perot changed his middle name from Ray to Ross to honor his father. Perot had an older brother, Gabriel Ross Jr., who died at an early age. Perot joined the Boy Scouts of America and made Eagle Scout in 1942. After leaving the US Navy in 1957, Perot became a salesman for IBM. He quickly became a top employee and tried to pitch his ideas to supervisors who largely ignored him. He left IBM in 1962 to found Electronic Data Systems in Dallas, Texas, and courted large corporations for his data processing services. He was refused 77 times before he was given his first contract. Just before the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the government of Iran imprisoned 2 ADS employees in a contract dispute. Perot organized and sponsored their rescue. In 1984, Perot bought a very early copy of Magna Carta, the document from the early 13th century. Okay, the Wikipedia article is coming up. 1215, authored by John, King of England, also known as John Lackland, or agreed to by him. It promised to protect the church rights and the barons from illegal imprisonment, access to swift justice, and limitations on feudal payments to the crown to be implemented through a council of 25 barons. Neither side, however, stood behind their commitments, and the charter was annulled by Pope Innocent III, leading to the First Barons' War. However, the Magna Carta had and still has a symbolic value. Okay, and we get back here. In 1988, Perot founded Perot Systems Corporation, incorporated in Plano, Texas. His son, Ross Perot Jr., eventually succeeded him as CEO. Perot engaged in unauthorized back-channel discussions with Vietnamese officials in the late 1980s, led to fractured relations between Perot and the Reagan and Bush administrations. In 1990, Perot reached agreement with Vietnam's foreign ministry to become its business agent in the event that diplomatic relations were normalized. Perot also launched private investigations of and attacks upon US Department of Defense official Richard Armitage. Perot did not support President George Bush and vigorously opposed the US involvement in the 1990 to 1991 Persian Gulf War. He unsuccessfully urged US senators to vote against the war resolution and began to consider his own presidential campaign. On February the 20th, 1992, he appeared on cable news networks Larry King Live and announced his intention to run as an independent presidential candidate if his supporters could get his name on the ballot in all 50 federal states. With such declared policies as balancing the federal budget, opposition to gun control, ending the outsourcing of jobs, and enacting electronic direct democracy via electronic town halls, he became a potential candidate and soon polled roughly even with the two major party candidates. With the insurgent candidacies of Republican Pat Buchanan and Democrat Jerry Brown winding down, Perot was the natural beneficiary of populist resentment toward establishment politicians. In June, Perot led a Gallup poll with 39% of the vote. However, by mid-July, he had dropped to 20 or 25%. Oh yeah, 20%. However, on October the 1st, just 33 days before the US presidential election, he re-entered the race, claiming that neither party had successfully addressed the issues that concerned the American people, meaning neither the ruling Republicans nor the main opposition Democrats. He campaigned in 16 states and spent an estimated $12.3 million of his own money. He employed the innovative strategy of purchasing half-hour blocks of time on major networks for infomercial-type campaign advertisements. This advertising garnered more viewership than many sitcoms, with one Friday night program in October attracting 10.5 million viewers. In one of his so-called infomercials, he criticized the employment policies of Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas, who was the Democratic presidential candidate in 1992, claiming, if this sort of employment went into effect in the rest of the country, we'll all be plucking chickens for a living. Just before the three televised debates between the three major presidential candidates, which occurred, I think, from early October until late October 1992, Perot received 7 to 9% support in nationwide polls. The debates where he was quick to respond to questions and take positions which at least seemed sincere, even if they were not always so specific or well thought out, his popularity soared. And the debates likely played a significant role in his ultimate receipt of 19% of the popular vote. Many Democrats and Republicans conceded that Perot won at least the first debate. In the debate, he remarked, "Keep in mind our Constitution predates the Industrial Revolution. Our founders did not know about electricity, the train, telephones, radio, television, automobiles, airplanes, rockets, nuclear weapons, satellites, or space exploration. There's a lot they didn't know about. It would be interesting to see what kind of document they draft today. Just keeping it frozen in time won't hack it." And he also denounced Congress for its inaction. He also denounced George Bush for inaction. He said, according to William A. de Gregorio in his book, The Complete Book of U.S. Presidents, all you hear from Bush or Washington is Lawrence Welk Museum, Lawrence Welk music. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And we're spending $400 billion of our children's money to get you to vote for us again this year. And indeed, he received over 19.7 million votes, or 18.9% of the popular vote, making him the most successful third-party presidential candidate in terms of the popular vote since Theodore Roosevelt ran as the progressive Bull Moose presidential candidate in the 1912 presidential election. Perot managed to finish second in 2 states in Maine with 30.4%, just ahead of Bush, and in Utah with 27.3%. Clinton finished third in that state, and Bush won it. He received the most votes in some counties. A detailed analysis of voting demographics revealed that Perot's support drew heavily from across the political spectrum, with 20% of his votes coming from self-described liberals, while Perot sought to work to reduce the number of abortions. He still believed in principle in a woman's right to choose abortion. He did, however, say publicly that he would not appoint known homosexuals into his cabinet. Or was it even so that he would not appoint known adulterers into his cabinet either? 27% from self-described conservatives and 53% coming from self-described moderates. Economically, however, most Perot voters, or 57%, were middle class, with the bulk of the remainder drawing from middle class, 29%. Exit polls showed that Perot drew 38% of his vote from Bush and 38% of his vote from Clinton. Despite widespread claims that Perot acted as a spoiler, there is little reason to think he decisively affected the US presidential election's outcome in 1992. In November 1993, he faced US Vice President Al Gore in a televised debate on CNN on the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was then being considered by the United States House of Representatives. The debate was loud and confrontational. Whether it affected the vote's outcome or not, we don't know. I think the vote in favor of the NAFTA agreement, with those side deals to protect the environment and the workers' rights, especially in the United States, I think it was 233 in favor and 200 against. Perot's behavior during the debate, which was aired on Larry King Live on CNN, was a source of mirth or joy thereafter, or like even joking thereafter, including his repeated pleas to "let me finish" in his southern drawl. This debate was seen by many as effectively ending Perot's political career. And during his 1996 presidential campaign, he was not allowed to participate in the 2 televised debates between the main presidential candidates, President Clinton and former Senator Dole. However, he did have an informal interview on US television during the campaign. After his political career ended, he largely refrained from openly commenting on politics. Refusing to answer most questions from the press. When interviewed, he usually remained on the subject of his business career and refused to answer specific questions on politics, candidates, or his past activities. One exception to this did come in 2005, when the Texas legislature or its leaders asked him to testify before that chamber in support of proposals to extend technologies to students, including making laptops available to them. He also supported changing the process of buying textbooks by making e-books or electronic books available, and by allowing schools to buy books at the local level instead of going through the state. In an interview which he gave in April 2005, Perot expressed concern about the state of progress on issues that he had raised in his presidential campaigns. Perot no longer endorsed any candidates in the 2016 US presidential election. During his two political campaigns, he spoke less on social issues and instead focused on the time's fiscal issues. Perot did not fit a conservative Southerner's typical stereotype. His views were seen as liberal and usually focused on his economic policy to keep support during his campaigns and gain support from both Democratic and Republican voters from his home state of Texas. Perot was for abortion rights. He also supported homosexual rights, and he, at least in old age, favored stricter gun controls, such as an assault rifle ban and increased research in AIDS. However, since 2000, he had been pro-choice reluctantly. He believed that tax should have been increased on the wealthy, while spending should have been cut to help pay off the national debt. He also believed capital gains tax should have been increased while giving tax breaks to those starting new businesses. As of 2012, the Perots had 16 grandchildren. Their 5 children are named Ross Jr., Nancy, Suzanne, Carolyn, and Catherine. With an estimated net worth of about $4.1 billion in 2019, he was ranked by Forbes as the 167th richest person in the United States. He died after a battle with leukemia. In 1986, he became only the third American to receive the Winston Churchill Award for his efforts on behalf of American prisoners of war in Vietnam in the 1960s and for organizing the rescue of 2 EDS employees from a prison in Iran. In April 2009, Ross Perot was made an honorary Green Beret at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. In September 2009, the Texarkana Independent School District named him as a 2009 Distinguished Alumnus. In October 2010, Perot was given the William J. Donovan Award from the Oasis Society at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Washington, D.C. He was the award's 26th recipient. And if I remember correctly from the late Reverend Billy Graham's autobiography, Just As I Am, Ross Perot attended a Presbyterian church in Texas.